Hello there, kia ora. Welcome to this week's Omnibus edition. Don't forget to hit that like button, share the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, because that's what feeds the algorithm, and we've got to feed the algorithm. Anyway, this week's episode is actually missing one of the videos from during the week, the one on Monday with the big musical montage of all the headlines from the last 12 months of the government being in power, because it keeps being demonetized anytime I put anything on there, and I don't like the copyright strikes. But it is still available to watch if you want to watch it as an individual episode, but it's not with the rest of them this week. Anyway, sit down and enjoy a week that included a couple of very strange opinion polls that don't really mean much at all. Wellington City Council doing their job and the government getting upset about it because scary left-wing elected officials, and a very strange roundup of news that also included some really nutty news items. Anyway, sit down, enjoy the video, have a good one. Hello there, kia ora. Yesterday marked the 1-year anniversary of the election that saw the current coalition put into power. So, to mark the moment, One News released a poll, which I'll get to shortly. Remember, when it comes to polls, they're really good for seeing trends, but we're still at least 6 months out from a snap election, caused by the change of deputy prime ministers and which one can make the most noise to get the attention of the media, tearing down the ever more tenuous relationship between two highly volatile coalition partners and National. And it's also important to remember that when it comes to polls, they're often presented in isolation. So the results of the Kantar One News poll will reference the last One News Kantar poll, but probably not the polls from Roy Morgan and Courier that came out over the last couple of weeks. And each poll does this. They compare to their own data sets. So the way to see the actual trends are to look at a variety of polls to see if the trends are in fact, trending, or if we're looking at some rogue elements. But before we get to that, let's take a look at how the coalition celebrated their 1-year anniversary. New Zealand First held their AGM in Kirikiriroa, Hamilton. Only you're not allowed to call it that because it's got Te Reo Māori in it, where Winston Peters claimed normal people are endangered. He made comments referencing that time Chumbawamba told him to leave their name out of his mouth, pushed the "we just want fairness in women's sport" anti-trans dog whistle, claimed his party had done more for Māori than all other parties combined, and that young people today have no standards in Parliament, and claimed that his party don't work on ideological soundbites. You know, the party of removing Te Reo Māori and making English an official language, pushing anti-trans rhetoric and COVID mandate protester talking points, demanding the removal of tools like RSE from school. They're totally not about ideological soundbites. ACT celebrated culling over 2,000 public servants and then blamed the drop in New Zealand university rankings on treaty obsessions, then rattled off a really long list of things that they really want to take credit for. And National put out a tweet saying they're delivering on their core promises of rebuilding the economy. You know, the economy that's seen steady price increases on basic cost of living with less expenditure, higher unemployment rates, Treasury throttling interest rates because the economy was restricting spending too much, and the biggest exodus of New Zealanders overseas in a decade. They're also apparently delivering on law and order, which saw massive spikes in violent crimes in areas that aren't Auckland Central, while implementing punitive responses that have been proven not to work, while also breaching the Bill of Rights Act to look tough on crime. And they also said something about delivering better public services, like we're seeing in, for example, our health sector, with hiring freezes, understaffed hospitals, downgraded services, and more expensive primary healthcare options, questions around mental health funding allocations, the Office of Suicide Prevention existing in name only as staff are made redundant, and costs back on prescription medicines, as just one example of the many areas where services are clearly getting better. They also announced that they're making the Waitemata Harbour a special sanctuary to help rebuild fish populations in the area, which you'll be able to catch using special nets, completely negating the plan to rebuild native fish populations. So how does that play out in the polls? Well, the latest Kantar poll says 2/3 of us think the country is no better or it's worse off than it was a year ago. On the flip side, about 10% lesser people say that they are no worse off or think the country is getting better than a year ago. And most people who say that are likely to vote for ACT or New Zealand First, which isn't really a surprise. After all, it seems like there wasn't a policy the tiny support parties didn't get into the coalition agreements. Of course, the very small amounts of people who voted for them are going to be happy with that. And the further south you go down the country, the unhappier people seem with the government as well. As for the poll itself, well, it's not really impactful or concerning for any political party because of how far out the election should be. But Chris Hipkins did raise a point on the story on this, where he said he was looking at how the parties are trending over all the polls so far. And that's slightly better news for Labour, with recent poll trends showing a general uptick in support, with a general trend of National losing support, which you can see in this, which is a poll of all the polls that have been taken this year. But the support parties have a different problem. When you're using a sample size of 1,000 people, it can be a lot more difficult to get an accurate idea of polling because the numbers in support are closer to the margin of error. There are also some issues with methodology and adjustments being made for sample weighting, which can impact the support parties more. And of course, no poll results, including these ones, usually include the number of people who don't know how they would vote, which for last night was 9%, which is more than the vote count for 2 coalition parties and 1 opposition party, which is another reason to remember that polls are really good at giving us trends to look at. And this far out from an election, be it 6 months when Winston decides to make a lot of mess to get his poll numbers up, or 12 months when David Seymour throws his toys because National actually said no to him for once, or even 2 years by the grace of whichever deity managed to hold them all together that long, they're all right for talking points. But when it comes to these polls, nothing is set in stone by them at this stage in the game. Hello there, kia ora. There should be some headlines that come as no big shock to the world. The story on New Year's Day about the first baby born in the country. The annual dude who waited outside for a couple of hours in front of a store to buy an iPhone when it's first released. The annual best pie contest winner, or some rich white dude with links to a political party getting ongoing name suppression. They're all staples of our media. But there's other headlines which some people seem to be genuinely shocked by this week, where they really shouldn't be. Like this one. The number of people who are homeless in Wellington is the worst that it's been in decades. After Associate Housing Minister Tama Potaka announced huge reductions in emergency housing numbers and answered a follow-up question from the media with, "I don't know where 30% of them have gone," well, this headline was what people expected to happen. It was telegraphed by the opposition parties, by social groups like social welfare organisations, housing organisations, that this was going to be the outcome of that particular comment. So it shouldn't be a surprise when it is. Or the fact that some people feel that Christopher Luxon is a little out of touch. Over half of the country, apparently. And some people are genuinely shocked by the fact that Mr. I get it, I'm rich, I'm sorted, Mr. I own several rental properties and I won't discuss lowering the rent on them because of the downward pressure I claimed was going to lower rents, but I will sell some of them to make untaxed capital gains after I move the Brightline test and my properties fall outside of that. Or the Mr. Yes, I claimed the clean car discount, then got rid of it because apparently it was upsetting farmers. Mr. crossed the road in a limo to say he was a man of the people. Mr. It cost me $60 a week for groceries. Mr. Well, I'm entitled to housing entitlements and it's not about the friggin' targets. The Prime Minister who spent more time overseas than he has in Dunedin since being elected, yeah, he's seen by a few people as being out of touch. Oh, hey, quick footnote. When I was doing research for this piece and going through the TVNZ Twitter account where they put this story out, the right-wingers who were like, nope, don't believe it, fake news, every single one of them that had a publicly facing profile with content you could actually check out was filled with alt-right disinformation and outright hateful bigotry. Make of that what you will. When controversy happened around the Human Rights and Race Relations Commissioner choices, roles which should be filled out by someone with no publicly accessible skeletons in their closet, it was no surprise to find a headline later that, well, something smelled dodgy in the application process. It turns out Paul Goldsmith went for the applicant who was seen as the least appropriate one for the job by the independent panel of experts hired to vet the candidates. And one of the other candidates, the one who got the job, was added later at his request, which sounds problematic when you realise that that particular candidate helped raise funds for alt-right grifters to come over here and start telling people about the Great Replacement theory. When this government starts making noises about English first and making it an official language to vice signal to voters, it should come as no shock that you see headlines where that's being implemented in public services in ways which could be detrimental in the long run to some patients with limited English skills. Or the deaf. Now, there's a number of reasons why these shouldn't have been surprising headlines. Some are cases of history repeating itself. We saw under the Key government, after all, an increase in homelessness due to punitive welfare policies and a housing crisis. We've seen so much effort going into make Luxon likable with his social media output, and yet he's consistently polled poorly in personal ratings since before the election. That's a sure sign people feel he's out of touch. In the past, Paul Goldsmith has been known to make decisions to promote questionable people. Just take a look at his hagiography of Don Brash, paid for as an election campaign tool to make Brash look good. And just look into the research on how political figures spouting their ideologies from far-flung corners of political discourse emboldens others to do the same, and how a clearly fractured organisation that's not communicating well causes problems like the messaging from Waikato Hospital and the muddled reactions to smooth it over. So why do we keep repeating these things, and why are people still shocked by them? Well, one's actually a form of confirmation bias. For those that voted for this government, it can be really hard to accept that the people you voted for have issues. And that's something that happens no matter who you vote for, and voters across the political spectrum do it all the time. It is, after all, kind of interesting, though, that the percentage of people who feel Luxon is hip and with it is almost identical to the number of people who would vote for National in the same poll. Another is around media coverage. Even when it's negative, just having a lot of coverage can help give the impression of competence to those whose bias won't let them see any criticism as negative. But this government is also really selective about the media it interacts with. They'll happily go on News Talk, where Barry Soper will tell people the left are mean to him because he's rich, and our mainstream media tend to lean a bit right. But not one member of the coalition has been seen on left-wing alternative media to explain their perspectives. Hey, if there's any coalition MPs watching this on the DL, well, we did actually send most of you invites to come join us on our Friday night shows. Like 98% of you. There's like 2 people that I won't ever have on my show. They know who they are. They know what they did. And I might add Simon Watts to that list because apparently he doesn't like my shirts. They're far too bright. But the invites are sitting there in your inbox if you'd like to change your mind and come and join us so we can see your perspective on things. I think it'd be really awesome for the audience to hear from you directly. They're in your inbox now. Anyway, let me get back to this. Or possibly it's down to that old adage that those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And since the study of history is a humanities topic, it's not the focus of right-wing governments. So the cycle's just going to keep on going. Hello there, kia ora. Good news, everyone! Inflation is now within the 1 to 3% band that the Reserve Bank likes it to be in, back to 2.2%, which is the lowest rate it's been in 3.5 years. So, you know what that means? It's time for the government to crow about how they tamed the beast that was inflation. And time to debunk that claim again. The economy the coalition inherited was actually in pretty decent shape. We know this because of the PREFU report, the Pre-Election Economic and Fiscal Update. Under the last government, PREFU showed an expected growth in the economy of 2.6%, no predicted recession, wage growth of 4.8%, and a natural peak to unemployment rates of around 4%. What we have now is the economy shrinking, 0.2% in the 3 months of the June quarter for economic growth and 0.5% shrinkage annually to that date. December numbers were adjusted to flat, which means it's not technically a recession, but it's within spitting distance of it. Wage growth only went up 3.6% to the end of June, and unemployment grew from 3.6% in June 2023 to 4.6% in June 2024, with economists predicting an unemployment rate now peaking at around 5.2% for December, meaning wage growth will continue to shrink as more people chase fewer jobs. And PREFU was done in a time of high inflation, with the report being put together by Treasury for all parties and the public to have access to, so no matter the outcome of the election, every party knew the financial standing of the government books. So let's start with something really obvious. Inflation was at record highs everywhere, not just here, because of a bunch of international pressures like the hangover from the lockdown years on supply chains, wars, and the volatility of energy prices. Other smaller factors like housing availability, climate change, and price gouging were all factors as well, according to the Groundwork Collaborative think tank. So, Treasury put the brakes on interest rates to slow down spending and help get inflation under control, because price is determined by demand. Limiting demand controls prices. They did this back when Labour was still in power, and at the time, Adrian Orr said they were engineering recession circumstances to tame inflation. And Labour had put into legislation that unemployment numbers had to be taken into consideration. Or, there'd be nothing stopping some English grad from just firing a whole bunch of people for the sake of it to save the economy. Anyway, when that process started, Treasury had planned for the last quarter of 2024 to be when inflation was back in line. And we look at that, it is. Now, it could have been lower. Treasury has again said that there's some sticky elements which keep inflation higher than it needs to be. These are what we call non-tradable. They're domestic prices that are from local sources. This last quarter, they rose 1.3%. That quarter before that, they rose 4.9%. And these are areas where government policy does have an impact on inflation. The biggest of those impacts, local authority rates rises, which went up on average 12.2% around the country. That water infrastructure plan that central government sent back to councils and made them reincorporate into their costs, the sudden withdrawal of public transport funding and road safety features and maintenance, they're all costs that have often been shared between government and local authorities, but now they've all been put back onto councils as funding's dried up. That's in part what's led to this massive increase. In Auckland, the removal of the regional fuel tax also fed into that rates increase, but did also help in bringing down the cost of transport. But this is still the largest national rates increase we've seen since 1990. And then there's rents. They're up 4.6% for the year. All that downward pressure that Christopher Luxon said renters would be thanking him for, all those tax rebates and mortgage interest write-offs, well, they seem to really help keep rents going up. Oh, and insurance is up 12.9%. Over the past few years, the country's actually been hit by a few pretty extreme weather events that were worsened by the impacts of climate change, which drives up insurance premiums. This government's policies also drive up emissions and ignore climate concerns. And as much as, groundswell want their followers to believe banks and insurers are climate alarmists and they're being unfairly targeted because of their stance towards looking after the environment, well, this means insurers need to either continue to increase costs for what will become even more frequent and volatile events, or stop insuring people altogether. On top of this are increases to the Consumer Price Index, which rose 0.6% last quarter, where the highest contributors were those rates bills, food costs, and medical costs. In fact, medical costs have gone up 10.1% over the last year, and most of that was actually the reimposition of prescription charges and fee increases in primary health providers, which leads to less people visiting doctors and more people putting pressure on our underfunded healthcare system. So while there is bound to be backpatting, social media, and press comments about how well the government is doing managing the economy, remember the areas that are causing the problems with stickiness in inflation numbers, the areas that are hitting you the hardest in the pocket, are choices, and the issues are caused directly by policy and actions from the current coalition. Hello there, kia ora. This week, we've heard more noise coming from the government around Wellington City Council and some nebulous will they, won't they questions from the media about if the government's going to step in. The fact is, though, that the government actually doing anything would be a major overreach at this stage for a number of reasons. What we're seeing out of Wellington City Council is, well, normal politicking. It's not often that you'll get an entire council that share every view on every decision that they make. That's part of the reason for how our democracy is set up. It's to ensure that decisions are made taking on board a range of views. The wider range of views, the more robust that process is. And while there are some decisions that some councillors will disagree on, there are others that they all work together on. Yesterday, for example, saw Wellington Council make unanimous decisions around a few things, and every other decision that Wellington Council has made has been done democratically with an elected majority. Just because some councillors don't agree and are often in the minority of votes, so they make public calls to bring in the commissioners, doesn't actually reflect on the ability of the elected body to do its job. It just makes those repeat whining offenders look bitter that the majority of voters in the city didn't see fit to elect people who share their specific values. And this happens in almost every city and every local authority in the country. So it's not like Tauranga in 2021 when stalemates effectively stopped the council from being able to do its role before the mayor asked for commissioners. And it's not like 2010 when Environment Canterbury had commissioners put in place after the Creech report, which was initially instigated by local mayors in Canterbury finding ECAN impossible to work with. One of those decisions, though, where WCC members didn't agree on was around the sale of airport shares. It's not the first time this debate has appeared before the council over the years, and every single time it does, it gets highly contentious. People are really passionate about asset sales in this country. The share sale was to address the increased insurance risk to the city by creating a more diversified investment fund to bring in returns to pay for upkeep on assets. Upkeep that's needed because of the risks of incidents going up because of their age or impacts from climate change on things like potential weather events like we saw in Otago or Auckland, and the fact that the city's built on a major fault line. A diversified fund income also deals with the fact that local authorities have really limited revenue tools available to them. And while shares will have a dividend payment, the return on the fund would be higher, but at the expense of having a say in the development of a major asset, the regional airport. Because the sale motion failed, the council will now have to find ways to fund that through cutting capital expenditure, the immediate money spent on repairs and maintenance of the city assets, since the investment funds aren't going to have immediate returns. So when it comes to next year's election, if you have a councillor saying, look, they'll fix the leaky pipes and voted against the sale of shares, there is a direct correlation in play. But they may also be telling people that the fund will fix the pipes later on, so maybe just hold on, don't worry so much about that leak right now. But that robust debate isn't illegal, which is another of the thresholds that needs to be reached for government intervention, which is what happened in Kaipara in 2012. They'd borrowed unlawfully, which led to massive budget blowouts and made them the most indebted council in the country. Wellington City Council has done no such thing, although debt levels for all local authorities are problematic and heavily impacted by decisions from central government, like the reincorporation of Three Waters into their books. In fact, when it comes to finances and planning, Wellington's got until June 2025 to lock down their plans, and then it's just a couple of months until the next election. To step in now would be a major line to cross while a democratically elected body undergoes a process all councils must undergo and are still doing it within legal timeframes and processes appointed to them. It would be an admission that central government fucked things up by forcing these costs and rehashing decisions already made back to councils and make Simeon look like he's unable to accept, the process or completely ignorant of them that councils already follow. But to be fair, that's also what we've kind of seen out of this government already. Look, based on a few soundbites from disgruntled right-wing councillors amplified through media, there is an impression that Wellington City Council can't do their job. But the reality is, they are a council which voters put in place with a large number of left-leaning personalities. In the city that Parliament's in, a parliament currently controlled by right-wing parties who aren't ideologically on the same page as the city council. So it's an easy target to punch down at because of how disengaged much of the public is with local democracy. And I guess for government it's a welcome reprieve from questions like, who ever said anything about a capital gains tax on KiwiSaver? Why are the budgets so low for school lunches that Nainai College can't find contractors to be able to provide food to school kids? And can you see a link between underfunding primary and emergency healthcare and how that impacts the cover claims ACC is required to pay out on? A few disgruntled councillors on the right and a few opportunistic vague mumblings from Simeon and Nicola Willis talking about an intervention sounds more like cancel culture than what's really needed here. More people being aware of how local governance actually works, more people getting involved with it, and more people being willing to listen to a range of viewpoints instead of just the sound bites that appeal to them. Hello there, kia ora. Welcome to this week's news. This week, Tararua Mayor Tracy Collis, seen here threatening to send Eka Tahuna's giant kiwi to Wellington like a vengeful kaiju if she's not listened to, laid down an ultimatum to the government and Transport Minister Simeon Brown, seen here showing what greets you when you die and go to the bad place, over the proposed toll for Te Hahu Aturanga Manawatu Tararua Highway. In her ultimatum, Mayor Collis has said that she will refuse to take back the maintenance of 3 detour routes if the toll is put in place. These routes were previously maintained by the council, but after the gorge closure, Waka Kotahi took over. Collis argues that if a toll is imposed on the new road, the traffic on the other roads would still be substantially more than their maintenance budgets allow, since the region already has the 4th largest roading network in the country and a rating base of only 10,200 people. Concerns have been raised by a range of rural groups, including Federated Farmers and the Rural Women's Group, over cancelled school bus routes in rural areas. So far, this year 21 rural bus routes have been cancelled, with a further 11 being replaced or combined into other routes. The primary concern is that this limits the ability of children in rural areas to access education, and it means some families are considering leaving the farming industry to find places better able to access schooling. Rural Women New Zealand President Gil Naylor says, quote, "In rural areas there's no public transport options, no footpaths or cycleways. Our roads are not safe for kids to be biking to school." In response, Transport Minister Simeon Brown, seen here promoting the new horror film Smile 2, said, "We really appreciate our rural communities and are glad that they get to see in action our plans for public transport in urban centres before anyone else. Instead of thanking the bus driver, they can thank us instead." Immigration Minister Erica Stanford, seen here giving a rendition of Evita's Don't Cry For Me Argentina, this week announced eligibility changes to the Migrant Exploitation Protection Work Visa. Under these changes, exploited migrant workers will no longer be able to apply for a 6-month visa extension more than once, and the definition of the term exploited is being changed to only include a quote-unquote genuine employment relationship. And applicants must also now meet minimum experience and skills thresholds and English language requirements to apply for the visa. This happened as the employer theft bill introduced last term by Ibrahim Omar, seen here, chuffed to know that you can't beat Wellington on a good day, passed its second reading with the support of New Zealand First. Despite cries from National, the party that reintroduced 90-day trials, delivered the lowest minimum wage increase on record, and tiny tax cuts for low wage earners, fired thousands of public servants and demanded the return of others from work from home, claiming that they were the party of workers and didn't like being told that they couldn't steal workers' wages. New data out of the Public Service Commission this week has shown that despite ministerial drives to cut costs and 7,000 public sector jobs cut to pay for tax cuts that the government still had to borrow for, the public service costs continue to grow and wages have increased, with the total base salary for public services increasing 5.3% to $6.5 billion. Over the past 12 months, redundancy payouts have cost the government $50 million, while the annual average salary for public servants went up 4.6% to $101,700 per year, with the highest paid salaries going to David Seymour's new Ministry of Regulation, and an average $150,000 a year. So well done, Nicola Willis. Clearly that plan to make savings worked out as well as all your others. The Green Party this week voted unanimously to have Darlene Tana, pictured here saying, "Is it me? Am I the drama? I don't think I'm the drama," removed from Parliament. As a result of the vote, the Greens have written to Tana to again request she resign and inform Speaker Jerry Brownlee of their decision as part of the process to enact the Waka Jumping Bill. The Green Party has been hesitant to use the provision since they did not support it initially, despite voting for it as a part of a confidence and supply agreement with Labour at the time in 2018. Said Prime Minister Christopher Luxon, "While this is a matter for the Green Party, I want to encourage MPs to take advantages of rule changes, so there's less heat on me for changing the Brightline test than selling a property that fell out of the new criteria and made me a heap of untaxed capital gains." New data out of MSD this week showed an extra 12,000 people on benefits compared to this time last quarter, and the number of people on main benefits aged between 15 and 64 at the highest ever recorded levels. Social Development Minister Louise Upston, seen here watching in abject horror as a beneficiary who was sanctioned for not answering their phone after it was disconnected due to the decreased allowance they get from being sanctioned, and had the audacity to ask MSD for an emergency grant to help pay their phone bill so they could continue to look for work in a market overcrowded with the highest number of people on job seeker benefit ever recorded, said, "We're working really hard to make sure that in 12 months' time we can proudly say that 2024 numbers were good in hindsight, because there'll probably be a lot more then." This week, psychologists ask that where possible you keep an eye out on the most fragile men you know. It's Dame Jacinda Ardern getting her damehood week. The former Prime Minister has not been able to attend the official ceremony in Aotearoa to have the title bestowed, but was recently in Britain for her work as part of the trustees on the Earthshot Prize with Prince William. So arrangements were made for the formal ceremony to be held on the grounds of Windsor Castle. Of course, this is incredibly triggering for those snowflakes who think they could do a better job than she did in the face of a global pandemic, terrorist attack, and volcanic eruption, all while raising a young family facing the most disgusting online vitriol and death threats and running the country. So keep those poor fragile people in your thoughts this week. Or block them and let them cry to themselves and don't let them bring you down. And speaking of the most fragile people you know, Reality Check Radio today launched what it's calling an anti-woke chocolate bar. It comes in two flavors, he, him, that contains nuts, and she, her, that's eaten by nuts. For the low price of $8.95, you can grab one bar of either variety, which contains the same amount of chocolate as you'll find in 3 rows of a Kit Kat, as long as you don't change the wrappers. That's not allowed. You can stick it to the woke mob on the RCR website, or head to Pack and Save and get 2 big blocks of something decent from a company that isn't trying to scam people and rage farm them with sweet treats. And finally, in a moment of blatant self-promotion, I'm heading to Whangarei in November, on November 7th, as part of the Network Waitangi Whangarei free lecture series, The Treaty and Me. In my talk, I'm going to talk you through a journey that involves land grabs, grave desecration, hero worship of war criminals, and why it's dumb to listen to rich white folk who have a history of trying to get their own way through any means possible, no matter how expensive, and then tell you elite Māori are coming for you in the night. You can actually find the details for that on the Network Waitangi Whangarei website, which I'll also put in my link tree so you can hunt all the details down there. And that, everybody, is this week's news. Hey, thanks for checking out this week's Omnibus edition. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that like button, share, subscribe, whatever options are out there for you. And don't forget to look after yourself during the week. And if you need more details about that event that's mentioned on the 7th of November, you can find that at the Network Waitangi Whangarei website, which I'll put in the description down below. Until next time, though, make sure you're looking after each other, live long and prosper. May the force be with you. Here, the links to other things that come at the end of YouTube videos.